My name is Madison Reynolds, and at 34, I never imagined I'd be starting over. 7 years of marriage to Ethan Reynolds, tech billionaire and Silicon Valley's golden boy, ended the night he coldly told me to sleep in the guest room. That single sentence shattered the carefully crafted illusion of our perfect life. For years, I'd ignored the growing distance, the subtle control, the dismissive comments, all while smiling for the cameras and playing my part. Before I tell you how I went from corporate wife to serving divorce papers to one of America's wealthiest men, drop a comment letting me know if you've ever had to make a difficult decision that changed your entire life. Like and subscribe to join me on this journey of reclaiming my worth. 9 years ago, I was Madison Carter, a 5-year-old marketing executive at Foster & Klein, one of San Francisco's top advertising firms. I had my 5-year plan mapped out: become the youngest creative director in the company's history, buy my own condo, and maybe, if time permitted, find someone who understood my ambition and independence. Then I met Ethan Reynolds at a tech conference where my firm was pitching for his business. His company, Neurosync, was valued at nearly $200 million, impressive, but nowhere near the behemoth it would become. When he approached me after my presentation, I assumed he wanted to discuss marketing strategies. Instead, he asked about the book peeking out of my bag, a biography of Ada Lovelace. Most marketers try to sell me on trends and virality, he said, his blue eyes intensely focused on mine. You talked about legacy and innovation that matters. That's rare. Our conversation moved from Ada Lovelace to ethical tech development, then to our favorite hidden spots in San Francisco. 3 hours later, we were still talking over dinner at a small Italian restaurant in North Beach. Ethan was brilliant, passionate, and surprisingly down-to-earth for someone on the verge of tech stardom. He listened when I spoke, really listened, and challenged my ideas without dismissing them. Our first official date was the following weekend. Ethan sent a car to pick me up, but instead of some flashy restaurant, we ended up at the California Academy of Sciences after hours. He'd arranged a private tour, knowing I'd mentioned my love of marine biology in passing. I wanted you to see the real me, he explained as we stood alone in the aquarium tunnel, surrounded by swirling silver fish. Not the tech guy everyone expects. What followed was a whirlwind romance that felt both exhilarating and genuine. Ethan sent thoughtful gifts, books we'd discussed, a vintage microscope after I told him about my childhood dream of becoming a scientist, handwritten notes hidden in my purse before important meetings. But more precious than these gestures was how he made space for my ambitions. I'm not looking for someone to stand in my shadow, he told me 3 months in. I want a partner who shines in her own right. My parents were thrilled but cautious. He seems wonderful, honey, my mother said after meeting him. Just make sure you don't lose yourself in his world. My best friend Jessica was more direct. He's gorgeous, smart, and rich. There has to be a catch. No one's that perfect. But I was falling in love with the man who debated ethics with me over breakfast, who coded until 3 a.m. but still remembered to call me before I went to sleep, who looked at me like I was the most fascinating puzzle he'd ever encountered. Ethan proposed on our 1-year anniversary during a weekend trip to Big Sur. No elaborate production, just the two of us on a cliff overlooking the Pacific at sunset. The ring was his grandmother's, reset with stones that matched my eyes. I never believed in forever until I met you, he said, his voice unusually vulnerable. Build this life with me, Madison. We married 6 months later at a vineyard in Napa. The ceremony was lavish but intimate, only 80 guests who truly mattered to us. I wore a simple Vera Wang gown, and Ethan's face when he saw me walking down the aisle is still one of my most treasured memories. Our vows were personal, promising partnership and respect alongside love and faithfulness. Our first home as a married couple was a penthouse in Pacific Heights. I continued at Foster & Klein, refusing Ethan's offer to take it easy now that we're set for life. My career mattered to me, and those early days, he respected that. We'd have dinner together most nights, taking turns, cooking, or discovering new restaurants. Weekends were sacred, no work allowed unless absolutely necessary. We traveled, entertained, volunteered, planned for the future. In our second year of marriage, Neurosync's value crossed the billion-dollar threshold after a groundbreaking AI integration with healthcare systems. Life got busier, but we were navigating it together. I was promoted to creative director, the youngest in the firm's history, and Ethan threw a surprise party with all my friends and colleagues. When he toasted me that night, his pride seemed completely genuine. To my brilliant wife, who conquers the advertising world while I'm still trying to figure out how to make our coffee maker work consistently. But small changes were occurring, so subtle I barely noticed them at first. Ethan started working later, sometimes not coming home until I was already asleep. Our weekend rule bent, then broke altogether. He'd check his phone during our conversations, his mind clearly elsewhere. When I voiced concerns, he'd kiss my forehead and say, "Just a temporary crunch, Matt. Once we secure the Meridian deal, things will calm down." For our second anniversary, we planned a 2-week trip to Japan. I spent months learning basic Japanese and researching hidden gems beyond the tourist spots. 3 days before our departure, Ethan told me he needed to postpone just for a few days. He promised due to an unexpected issue with investors. "I'll make it up to you," he said, looking genuinely torn. "This company supports both our dreams, right? Sometimes sacrifices are necessary." I believed him then. We did eventually make it to Japan, albeit for a shortened trip, and Ethan was present and engaged, just like the early days. On our last night in Tokyo, watching the city lights from our hotel room, he held me close and whispered his plans for our future. A family home with space for children, summer vacations in Europe, growing old together in a beach house. "We're building something extraordinary together, Madison," he said. "The best is yet to come." I fell asleep in his arms that night, hopeful and secure in our shared vision, completely unaware that the foundations were already beginning to crack. By our 4th anniversary, Ethan's company had transformed from a promising startup into a tech giant valued at over $20 billion. NeuroSync's neural interface technology was revolutionizing everything from medical diagnostics to educational platforms, and my husband had become a household name in the tech world. We moved from our Pacific Heights penthouse to a sprawling $30 million estate in Atherton. The property was breathtaking, 6 acres of meticulously landscaped grounds, a main house with 8 bedrooms, a separate guest house, swimming pool, tennis court, and a state-of-the-art home automation system that Ethan had personally enhanced. Our closest neighbors were other tech moguls and venture capitalists. Our former friends from our early days were now too far away for casual get-togethers. "We've arrived, Mad," Ethan said the night we moved in, popping champagne on our new terrace overlooking Silicon Valley. "Everything I've worked for, this is it." I noticed he said I rather than we, but dismissed it as a slip of the tongue. My role had expanded beyond my executive position at Foster & Klein. Now I was expected to manage our household staff, plan and host elaborate dinner parties for Ethan's business associates, sit on charity boards, and represent the Reynolds family at various social functions. My career, once a source of personal pride for both of us, was increasingly treated as a quaint hobby by Ethan's new circle. Madison insists on keeping her job. I overheard Ethan telling the wife of a venture capitalist at one of our parties, his tone somewhere between indulgent and patronizing. "She's always been independent that way." The woman had smiled sympathetically at me, as if my professional accomplishments were a cute eccentricity I would eventually outgrow. 5 months after our move, I was offered a position as Chief Marketing Officer at Foster & Klein. It was everything I'd worked toward: a seat at the executive table, creative control, equity in the firm. I planned a special dinner at home to celebrate with Ethan, cooking his favorite meal and setting up our private dining room with candles and flowers. He called at 7:30 p.m. when dinner was getting cold. "Something's come up with the Beijing investors," he said. Background noise suggesting he was at a restaurant. "Don't wait up, it might be a late one." When I told him about my promotion, his response was quick and distracted. "That's great, babe. We'll celebrate properly this weekend, I promise." The weekend came and went. The promised celebration never materialized. Ethan's physical presence in our home became increasingly rare. He traveled constantly: Tokyo, London, Dubai, New York, often extending trips with little notice. When he was home, he was perpetually in his office or on calls. Our conversations became functional rather than intimate. Household matters, social engagements, brief updates on our separate lives. "This is just how it is at this level," he explained when I expressed my loneliness. "Every major CEO goes through this phase. It's the price of building something revolutionary." I told myself this was temporary, that relationships have ebbs and flows, that once neurosync stabilized, we'd find our way back to each other. Meanwhile, I threw myself into my new role at Foster & Klein, our house charity foundation, and building friendships with other corporate spouses in similar situations. That's when Catherine entered our lives. Ethan's previous executive assistant had left to start a family, and Catherine Sterling was her replacement, Harvard-educated, impeccably efficient, and strikingly beautiful. From the beginning, there was something about her interaction with Ethan that made me uneasy. They shared inside jokes I wasn't part of, finished each other's sentences in meetings, and she seemed to know details about his preferences that even I wasn't aware of. "Catherine just gets how I work," Ethan said dismissively when I cautiously broached the subject. "That's what I pay her for." I tried to reconnect with Ethan by planning special dates and weekend getaways. I arranged a surprise trip to Carmel, where we'd spent a magical weekend early in our relationship. He canceled the morning of our departure due to server issues. I booked a private dinner at the Michelin-starred restaurant where he'd first told me he loved me. He showed up an hour late, spent most of the evening on his phone, then apologized with an expensive bracelet the following day. Our social circle had completely transformed. Gone were our friends from before NeuroSync's meteoric rise, the couples we used to have game nights with, the friends who knew us when we lived in a normal apartment and worried about paying student loans. Now, we socialized exclusively with other ultra-wealthy tech families, people whose conversations revolved around stock options, private schools, vacation properties, and the latest luxury purchases. I found myself carefully curating what I shared about our marriage in these circles. Image was everything, and admitting that my billionaire husband barely noticed me anymore would have been seen as ungrateful, even scandalous. So I smiled in designer dresses at charity galas, laughed at tech industry jokes I didn't find funny, and pretended not to notice when other wives gave me pitying glances. "You've adapted beautifully to this life," Victoria Chen, wife of a prominent venture capitalist, told me at a benefit. "Not everyone can handle the transition so gracefully." Her words were meant as a compliment, but they felt like a eulogy for the person I used to be. At home, I started feeling more like a luxury possession than a partner. Ethan consulted me on matters of appearance, what to wear to important functions, how to redecorate the house for maximum impression, but rarely on anything substantial. When I offered insights on his business challenges, drawing from my marketing expertise, he would listen politely, then proceed as if I hadn't spoken. The final straw of this phase came when I discovered, through a casual comment from our property manager, that Ethan had purchased a $15 million vacation home in Lake Tahoe. Not only had he never mentioned this significant acquisition, but he had also already furnished it and hosted business retreats there. "I was going to surprise you," he claimed when I confronted him, though his expression suggested he'd simply forgotten I might want input on a home I supposedly would be sharing. "You've been so busy with your marketing thing, I didn't want to bother you with the details." As I stood in our cavernous living room, looking at my husband of 4 years who had just dismissed my career as a marketing thing, I realized with perfect clarity I had become an accessory in my own marriage, a well-maintained, occasionally displayed, ultimately expendable component of Ethan Reynolds' perfectly curated life. "You bought a house without telling me?" I stood in our kitchen the morning after learning about the Lake Tahoe property, still in disbelief. $15 million, Ethan. That's not like buying a watch or even a car. Ethan barely looked up from his tablet, scrolling through emails while sipping his precisely brewed pour-over coffee. "It's an investment property, Madison. The market in Tahoe is exploding, and we got in at the perfect time." "We?" There was no we. I didn't even know about it until our property manager mentioned it by accident. He finally looked at me, his expression a mixture of impatience and bewilderment, as if I were overreacting to something trivial. "I earned it. I can buy what I want. It's not like we have budget constraints. This isn't about money. It's about partnership. About respect." "Don't be dramatic," he said, standing to leave. "I've got 3 calls this morning with Tokyo. We'll discuss this later if you're still upset." But later never came. When I tried to revisit the conversation that evening, Ethan deflected, saying he was too exhausted from his workday. The next morning, he left for Singapore before I woke up. His text message simply read, "Back Thursday. Catherine has the itinerary if you need me." That's when I began to notice the financial dynamics of our marriage more clearly. Despite my six-figure salary as CMO, I realized how little access or input I had to our shared wealth. Ethan controlled everything: significant investments, property purchases, even charitable donations in our joint name. I managed the household accounts, but these were essentially an allowance, replenished automatically when they fell below a certain threshold. When I requested access to our complete financial portfolio, Ethan's response was telling. "Why would you want to deal with that stress? I have a team of financial advisors handling everything." When I persisted, he reluctantly had his accountant send me a simplified overview, excluding what I later discovered were significant holdings and transactions. Over the next year, our emotional distance widened into a chasm. We slept in the same bed, but rarely at the same time. Physical intimacy became infrequent, then practically non-existent. Conversations were superficial logistics, schedules, social obligations. During a rare moment of vulnerability, I suggested marriage counseling. "We're drifting apart, Ethan. I hardly know you anymore." His reaction was swift and dismissive. "Counseling? I don't have time for that nonsense. This is just a phase all couples go through it. Besides, what would people say if they knew the great Ethan Reynolds needed marriage therapy?" That last sentence revealed volumes about his priorities. The incident at the NeuroSync annual gala crystallized everything that had been happening incrementally. As a major donor was discussing the company's potential expansion into educational technology, I mentioned some relevant research from a marketing study my firm had conducted with schools. "Madison has such interesting little observations," Ethan interrupted, his hand tight around my waist. "But the reality of educational implementation is considerably more complex than consumer marketing." Now, as I was saying about the neural integration capabilities, the donor looked embarrassed for me. I felt myself flush with humiliation as Ethan continued speaking as if I were a child who had interrupted the adult. Later that evening, when I confronted him about publicly undermining me, his response was chilling. "You were out of your depth, Madison. I saved you from embarrassing yourself. I am the chief marketing officer of a major firm. That was literally my area of expertise. Your firm handles luxury goods and lifestyle brands. My company is changing how human brains process information. They're hardly comparable." In that moment, I saw clearly what I'd been denying. My husband didn't respect me. Perhaps he never truly had. Around this time, I formed an unexpected friendship with Grace Harrington, whose husband Thomas was the CFO of a biotech company in Ethan's circle. We met at a charity luncheon and bonded over being younger wives in the Silicon Valley ecosystem. Unlike the other corporate spouses who maintained perfect facades, Grace was refreshingly honest about her struggles. Over coffee one afternoon, she confided that she had divorced her first husband, also a wealthy executive, 3 years before meeting Thomas. "He was brilliant and successful," she said, stirring her latte. "Also controlling, dismissive, and eventually unfaithful." Sound familiar? I was taken aback by her directness. "Ethan and I are just going through a rough patch." Her smile was kind but knowing. I said those exact words for 2 years while my ex gradually erased who I was. Just be careful, Madison. When a man with power starts seeing you as an employee rather than a partner, the dynamic can become toxic very quickly. Her words haunted me in the following weeks as I began to consciously catalog Ethan's behavior. How he spoke over me, how decisions were announced rather than discussed, how he would dismiss my concerns as emotional or dramatic, how Catherine seemed to know more about his schedule, preferences, and thoughts than I did. Acting on an instinct I didn't fully understand, I began documenting everything. I kept a journal of Ethan's dismissive comments, gaslighting responses, and controlling behaviors. I secured copies of financial records when I could access them. I recorded particularly troubling conversations on my phone. Something in me recognized I might need evidence someday, though I wasn't ready to confront why. Then came the phone call that changed everything. I had returned home early from a business trip to New York, hoping to surprise Ethan with dinner. As I entered our silent house, I heard his voice from his home office, the door slightly ajar. "Catherine, you're overthinking this. Napa is perfect. It's close enough that we can drive back if needed, but far enough that we won't run into anyone who matters. A pause, then a laugh. Madison thinks I'm in Seattle that weekend for the developer conference. She never checks my schedule anyway. My hand froze on the doorknob. The developer conference in Seattle, the reason Ethan said he couldn't attend my firm's anniversary gala, where I was receiving a leadership award. Book the usual suite at Meadowood, he continued, and make sure they have that champagne from last time. As I stood there, phone automatically recording in my pocket, I felt something inside me crack and then harden. The man I had loved, built a life with, defended to my increasingly concerned parents and friends, was planning a romantic weekend with his assistant, while creating elaborate lies to tell me. I didn't confront him immediately. Instead, I quietly went upstairs, unpacked my suitcase, and contemplated what my next move would be. The Madison who had entered this marriage would have demanded answers immediately, emotions blazing. But that Madison had been methodically dismantled over years of subtle degradation. The woman who sat on our marital bed now was calculating, strategic, preparing for war. 2 days passed before I confronted Ethan about what I'd overheard. I waited until we were both home on a rare evening when he didn't have calls or meetings. I'd prepared meticulously, mentally rehearsed what I would say, how I would remain calm, what evidence I had if he tried to deny everything. "We need to talk about your plans with Catherine in Napa," I said, as he poured himself a scotch in his home office. The crystal tumbler paused halfway to his lips, a momentary falter in his usually perfect composure. Then he set it down deliberately, his expression shifting from surprise to calculated neutrality. "What are you talking about? I overheard your phone conversation with her. The usual suite at Meadowood. The weekend you told me you'd be at the developer conference in Seattle." His denial was immediate and absolute. "You're confused, Madison. I was discussing a business retreat for the executive team. Catherine handles all the arrangements." "Don't lie to me," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Not anymore. You're being paranoid. This is exactly why I don't include you in business matters. You jump to dramatic conclusions based on fragments of information you don't understand." "Then show me your calendar," I challenged. "Let me see the executive team roster for this retreat." His eyes narrowed. "I don't have to prove anything to you. The fact that you're spying on me and making these accusations shows you're becoming unstable." That word, unstable, hit like a slap. It was the beginning of a narrative he could use against me if things escalated. 7 years, Ethan, I said quietly. 7 years of supporting you, believing in you, loving you, and this is what it comes down to? Lies and gaslighting? Something in his expression changed then, the calculated mask slipping to reveal a colder truth beneath. Supporting me? Let's be honest, Madison. I made you. Before me, you were a middle management marketing girl with student debt and a rented apartment. Everything you have this house, your position at Foster & Klein, your status, all of it, comes from being Mrs. Ethan Reynolds. His words stunned me into silence, not because they hurt, though they did, but because they revealed how he truly saw me not as an equal partner who had built a life with him, but as a beneficiary of his success, a subordinate who owed him gratitude. "That's what you really think? That I'm nothing without you?" He sighed, as if dealing with a particularly tiresome employee. "I think you've lost perspective on your place in this situation. I've built $1 billion company that's changing the world. I employ thousands of people. I make decisions daily that affect global markets. And you're creating drama over scheduling conflicts because you feel neglected? This isn't about feeling neglected. This is about respect, honesty, partnership, the foundation of any marriage." "Partnership?" He laughed, a sound entirely devoid of warmth. "Madison, be realistic. We have a beneficial arrangement. You enjoy a lifestyle that 99.9% of people can only dream of. In return, you manage our social obligations and public image. If you're expecting more at this point, that's your misunderstanding of the situation." The conversation deteriorated from there, with Ethan becoming increasingly dismissive and condescending. He recounted all the ways he'd elevated my life, all the opportunities I'd gained through his connections, implying that without him, I'd be nothing. When I brought up my own accomplishments, he minimized them. When I mentioned his controlling behavior, he called me ungrateful. Finally, his patience exhausted, He stood from behind his desk. I'm done with this conversation. You clearly need time to adjust your perspective and remember what matters in this marriage. And what exactly matters, Ethan? Because it's certainly not me. His expression was cold, almost bored. Sleep in the guest room until you get your head straight. I have an early flight tomorrow and don't need this melodrama disrupting my sleep. With that final dismissal, he walked past me out of the office, heading toward our bedroom, and closing the door firmly behind him. I stood frozen in the hallway, those words echoing in my mind. Sleep in the guest room until you get your head straight. Not let's work this out, or we need to talk more tomorrow, or even I'm sorry you feel this way. Just in order to remove myself from his presence until I accepted my designated role again. The guest room was beautifully appointed, like everything in our home: Egyptian cotton sheets, cashmere throws, a view of the manicured gardens. I lay awake most of the night, replaying not just our argument, but our entire relationship. Each memory now appeared in a different light, revealing patterns I'd been too in love or too willfully blind to see. The charming man who listened to my dreams had become someone who interrupted me mid-sentence. The partner who celebrated my early career wins now, dismissed my professional accomplishments as insignificant. The lover who once couldn't bear to be apart from me now preferred the company of his assistant. Morning came, and with it, the sound of Ethan's usual routine: shower running, closet doors opening, the soft murmur of a business call starting before 7 a.m. I remained in the guest room, waiting to see if he would check on me, apologize, or at least acknowledge our fight. He didn't. Instead, his assistant Catherine texted me. Ethan asked me to let you know he's heading to the airport and will be back Thursday evening. He has dinner scheduled both nights. I went downstairs after I heard the front door close. Our housekeeper Maria was preparing Ethan's usual breakfast smoothie, looking surprised to see me. Mr. Reynolds said you weren't feeling well this morning, she explained. He said to let you sleep in. Another lie, so casually told. Not only had he not checked on me, but he'd also created a cover story to explain my absence from our morning routine. I went through the motions that day: meetings at work, calls with the charity foundation, a lunch with a potential donor, all while a plan was forming in my mind. That evening, I texted Grace. Can we meet tomorrow? Somewhere private. I need your help. We met at a small cafe in Palo Alto, far from our usual haunts. I told her everything: the overheard phone call, the devastating argument, Ethan's true perception of our marriage. To my surprise, Grace didn't seem shocked. I've seen this pattern before, she said gently. With my ex, with friends' husbands. Men like Ethan don't want wives. They want executive assistants they can sleep with and show off at parties. What did you do? When you decided to leave? She reached into her purse and handed me a business card. I called Rebecca Chen, best divorce attorney in Northern California, specializes in high net worth separations involving controlling spouses. She'll protect you. I stared at the card, the word divorce making everything suddenly, terrifyingly real. I don't know if I'm ready for that step. Keep the card, Grace said. And Madison? If you do call her, don't use your regular phone or email. Men like Ethan monitor everything. When Ethan returned from his trip Thursday evening, he acted as if nothing had happened. He greeted me with a casual kiss on the cheek and asked if I'd confirmed our attendance at the Tech Philanthropy Gala next week. No mention of our fight, no acknowledgement that he'd banished me to the guest room. No discussion about the state of our marriage. I played along, pretending everything was normal, while secretly documenting every interaction, securing more financial records, and planning my next steps. On Friday, using a burner phone purchased with cash, I called Rebecca Chen and scheduled a consultation for the following Tuesday, while Ethan would be at the office. That weekend, watching my husband charm guests at a dinner party in our home, I realized I was seeing him clearly for the first time in years. The man who stood there discussing his company's latest innovations wasn't the Ethan I had fallen in love with. Perhaps that person had never really existed. This Ethan was calculating, self-absorbed, and fundamentally incapable of viewing me as an equal. On Monday morning, I woke up knowing with absolute certainty that my marriage was over. The only question remaining was how to exit it on my own terms. My meeting with Rebecca Chen changed everything. Her office in downtown San Francisco was deliberately understated, no flashy signage or ostentatious decor that might alert suspicious spouses when their partners visited. High-profile divorces are won or lost in the preparation phase, she explained after I'd shared my situation. And with someone like Ethan Reynolds, we need to be exceptionally thorough. Rebecca was in her early 50s, with a calm demeanor that belied her reputation as one of the most formidable divorce attorneys in California. She'd represented numerous spouses of tech moguls, venture capitalists, and executives, people who, like Ethan, were accustomed to controlling narratives and outcomes. First things first, she said, sliding a legal pad across her desk. I need you to write down all accounts, properties, investments, and assets you're aware of. Then we'll discuss what you might not be aware of. The list was long but incomplete. As I'd suspected, there were significant holdings Ethan had never disclosed to me, despite our prenuptial agreement requiring full financial transparency. This is actually good for us, Rebecca noted. Violations of disclosure requirements can render portions of a prenup unenforceable. Over the next 2 hours, we outlined a comprehensive exit strategy. My preparations would need to be methodical and discreet. 1. Secure personal finances by opening accounts at a bank Ethan didn't use. 2. Gather and store evidence of controlling behavior, financial concealment, and possible infidelity. 3. Document all assets I was aware of and investigate others. 4. Secure personal items and irreplaceable belongings. 5. Find a temporary residence that Ethan couldn't easily discover. 6. Prepare legally and emotionally for aggressive countermeasures. He will be furious, Rebecca warned. Men like Ethan don't lose control gracefully. He'll likely try to cut off your access to funds, pressure your employer, and possibly attempt to paint you as unstable or gold-digging to friends and family. I know, I said, realizing I'd been preparing for this unconsciously for months. Then let's make sure you're protected. The following weeks were an elaborate performance. By day, I continued as the perfect corporate wife managing our social calendar, appearing at Ethan's side at events, maintaining our home. By night, I executed my exit strategy with military precision. I secured a high-rise apartment in San Francisco, under an LLC Rebecca helped me establish, paying 6 months' rent in advance. I opened new bank and investment accounts, transferring personal funds and the inheritance my grandmother had left me money that was explicitly excluded from our prenup. The most challenging part was moving personal belongings without raising suspicion. I started with items Ethan would never notice: family photographs stored in the attic, jewelry from my parents, winter clothes from the guest closet. Each week, I moved a few more pieces books from my office, the paintings I'd collected before our marriage, personal documents stored in my desk. For items too large or numerous to move secretly, I hired a secure storage company that specialized in divorce situations. They arrived during Ethan's business trip to London, efficiently packing and removing my designated belongings while our household staff was given the day off. Just redecorating some rooms, I explained to our property manager, who looked skeptical but asked no questions. Throughout this process, I continued building my case. I backed up text messages, emails, and recorded conversations. I photographed financial documents. I kept a detailed journal documenting Ethan's behavior, absences, and contradictions. Rebecca reviewed everything, advising me on what would be most valuable in negotiations. The emotional toll was immense. Each night, I'd return to a house that no longer felt like home, smile at a husband I no longer recognized, and lie in bed planning my escape from a marriage I once believed would last forever. Doubt crept in during quiet moments. Was I overreacting? Could we fix this through counseling? Was I throwing away something salvageable? Then Ethan would make some casually demeaning comment, or I'd discover another financial decision made without my knowledge, and my resolve would strengthen again. 3 weeks into my preparations, I received an unexpected call from Michael Davis, one of Ethan's oldest friends and a board member at NeuroSync. "Can we meet for coffee?" he asked, sounding uncharacteristically hesitant. "There's something you should know." We met at a quiet cafe in Menlo Park. Michael looked uncomfortable, glancing around as if worried about being seen. "Ethan knows something's up," he said without preamble. "He's had his security team checking your movements, your calls, He mentioned hiring a private investigator. My blood ran cold. How did he find out? I don't think he knows specifics, but he's noticed changes, said you seemed strategic lately. Madison, he made some comments about making sure you remember your place. I don't know exactly what that means, but it didn't sound good. I thanked Michael for the warning, realizing I needed to accelerate my timeline. That night, I called Rebecca from my burner phone. We need to move faster, I explained. Ethan's suspicious and potentially having me followed. Come to the office tomorrow, she said. Bring everything you've gathered. We can file immediately if necessary. I worked through the night, gathering the last crucial documents, downloading financial records, and packing a final suitcase of essential items. At dawn, I drove to my new apartment and left the suitcase, then went directly to work as if it were a normal day. Rebecca and her team spent the day preparing our divorce filing, including motions for temporary financial support and protection against potential retaliation. I was scheduled to meet her at 6 p.m. to review and sign everything. At 3:47 p.m., my assistant informed me that Ethan was in our company lobby, asking to see me. He says it's urgent, she added, looking concerned. Should I send him up? My hands shook as I texted Rebecca. Ethan at my office. What now? Her response was immediate. Let him come up, act normal, say nothing about divorce. We're expediting the filing as we speak. Ethan entered my office with a calm I found more terrifying than anger. He closed the door behind him, surveying the space as if cataloging its contents. Interesting day, he said, sitting uninvited across from my desk. I had a meeting with our investment manager this morning. He mentioned you've liquidated some assets, personal assets, specifically exempted from our prenup. I kept my expression neutral. I'm restructuring my investment portfolio. Nothing unusual. And the apartment in Russian Hill? Is that also part of your investment strategy? So he knew. At least partially. I felt a curious sense of relief beneath the fear, no more pretending. How long have you been planning this? He asked, his voice dangerously soft. Planning what, exactly? Don't insult me, Intelligence Madison. The apartment, the bank accounts, the storage unit, the meetings with Grace Harrington, who, I might add, has quite the reputation for encouraging divorces among our circle. Would you believe me if I said I was just securing some independence? Creating some space for myself? His laugh was cold. Independence? We're married. Your space is with me, in our home, the home where you told me to sleep in the guest room until I get my head straight. The marriage where you make unilateral decisions and tell me I'm nothing without you? Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. You're making a serious mistake. Do you really think you can win against me? I have resources you can't imagine. This isn't about winning, Ethan. It's about escaping. He leaned forward, all pretense of civility vanishing. Let me be very clear. If you pursue this, I will destroy everything you care about. Your career? I sit on the board of your firm's largest client. Your reputation? I can ensure you never work in marketing again. Your family? I know about your father's business troubles. How long would his company survive without the contracts my network provides? The threats confirmed everything I needed to know about the man I had married. Are you recording this conversation, Ethan? Because I am. He blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. I have recorded every threat, every manipulative comment, every lie for the past month. I have documented your financial concealment, your emotional abuse, and yes, your affair with Catherine. Don't bother denying it. I have proof. If you want a war, I'm prepared. But it won't end well for the great Ethan Reynolds' carefully constructed public image. For perhaps the first time in our marriage, I saw real fear in his eyes, quickly masked by fury. You ungrateful bitch, I gave you everything. No, Ethan. You gave me things. Houses, cars, jewelry, status symbols that reflected well on you. What you took from me was far more valuable, my confidence, my voice, my self-worth. I reached into my desk drawer and removed a thick envelope, placing it on the desk between us. What's this? He demanded, not touching it. Divorce papers. I was going to have them served tomorrow, but since you're here, his face contorted with rage. You think it's that easy? You think you can just walk away with half of what I've built? I don't want half of everything. I just want what's fair. and my freedom. He stood abruptly, knocking his chair backward. "This isn't over. Not by a long shot. It is for me," I said, standing as well. With trembling hands but steady voice, I added, "Goodbye, Ethan." I walked past him, out of my office, and directly to the elevator, ignoring his calls behind me. My car was waiting at the curb. I'd arranged it earlier as a precaution. As we pulled away from the building, I saw Ethan emerge onto the sidewalk, phone to his ear, watching me disappear into the San Francisco traffic. That night, from my sparsely furnished but wonderfully private apartment, I called Rebecca to tell her what had happened. "You did well," she assured me. "But this is just the beginning. Get some rest. Tomorrow, we go to war." The aftermath of serving Ethan divorce papers was swift and severe. By 8 a.m. the following morning, our joint credit cards were canceled, access to our shared accounts frozen, and my company email was flooded with messages from anxious colleagues. NeuroSync had abruptly terminated its contract with Foster & Klein, a relationship worth millions that I had helped secure. Ethan's called an emergency board meeting. My CEO informed me when I arrived at the office. "He's threatening to pull connections with 3 other major clients unless we consider your position with the firm." I'd anticipated this move, but the reality still stung. "I have documentation of his threats. This is textbook retaliation. It may be illegal, but it's still devastating for the company," he replied, looking torn between supporting me and protecting the business. Rebecca had prepared me for this first wave of attacks. High-control spouses like Ethan typically begin with financial strangulation and professional sabotage, she'd explained. "They believe that without money or career status, you'll come crawling back." We'd already filed for emergency temporary support and submitted evidence of Ethan's retaliatory actions to the court. But legal wheels turn slowly, and Ethan had resources to accelerate or delay proceedings as suited his strategy. Meanwhile, Ethan launched a calculated smear campaign. Though he maintained a dignified public silence privacy during this difficult time, his proxies were less restrained. Suddenly, stories circulated through Silicon Valley about my alleged spending habits, questioning of my professional qualifications, and insinuations about my mental stability. The narrative was clear. Madison Reynolds was an opportunistic gold digger who had planned this all along. "Classic Darvo," Rebecca noted during our strategy meeting. "Deny, attack, reverse victim and offender. He's positioning himself as the wronged party." Most painful was how quickly certain friends evaporated. Couples we'd socialized with for years suddenly became unreachable. Invitations dried up. Former confidants viewed me with suspicion. The unwritten rule of the ultra-wealthy became clear. Sides were being chosen, and standing with me meant potentially crossing Ethan Reynolds. Not everyone abandoned me, however. My parents were unwavering, despite Ethan's attempt to leverage his business connections against my father's company. "He threatened to blackball us from tech industry contracts," my father told me, his voice steady despite the worry I knew he must feel. "I told him I'd rather close the business than see you stay in a marriage that was destroying you." A handful of true friends remained loyal. My college roommate Jessica offered her guest house when Ethan's legal team managed to challenge the ownership of my apartment. My former mentor from early in my career connected me with a new job opportunity at a firm beyond Ethan's immediate influence. Most surprising were the allies that emerged from unexpected quarters. Thomas Harrington, Grace's husband, privately reached out to express support. "Ethan doesn't know I'm contacting you," he wrote. But several board members are uncomfortable with his vindictiveness. "This isn't just about your divorce anymore. It's raising questions about his judgment as CEO." The divorce proceedings themselves were grueling. Ethan's legal team, a battalion of prestigious attorneys, employed every delay tactic and procedural maneuver possible. They challenged the validity of our prenuptial agreement due to changed circumstances. They disputed asset valuations and ownership. They demanded extensive discovery, burying us in paperwork and depositions. During my own deposition, Ethan's lead attorney, a sharp-suited woman with a reputation for ruthlessness, spent 8 hours attempting to portray me as calculating and manipulative. Mrs. Reynolds, Is it correct that you began planning your separation while continuing to enjoy the benefits of your husband's wealth and status? I began planning my exit when I realized my husband viewed me as property rather than a partner, I replied, maintaining the calm confidence Rebecca had coached me to project. And did you not conceal these preparations while continuing to attend events as Mrs. Ethan Reynolds? I concealed them because I feared my husband's reaction, a fear his subsequent actions have thoroughly justified. Through it all, Rebecca remained unshakable. When Ethan's team submitted a settlement offer that would have left me with a fraction of what I was entitled to, she simply laughed. "This isn't even worth countering," she said, sliding the document back across the conference table. "But we appreciate the acknowledgement that our case has merit." The real turning point came 4 months into the battle. Rebecca's forensic accounting team discovered significant discrepancies in Ethan's financial disclosures. Not only had he concealed assets during our marriage, violating the prenup, but he had also attempted to hide them from the court, violating California law. Additionally, my documentation of Ethan's controlling behavior, the recordings, texts, emails, and witness statements painted a damning picture that contradicted his public persona as a progressive tech leader. When this evidence was formally submitted to the court, his legal team's tone changed dramatically. "They're worried about more than just the divorce now," Rebecca explained. "Financial misrepresentations can have regulatory implications, and the behavioral evidence raises concerns about his corporate governance." Ethan's attempt to buy my silence came next, a substantially improved settlement offer, contingent on comprehensive non-disclosure agreements. "He's offering nearly triple his previous proposal," Rebecca noted. "He's scared." "Not scared enough," I replied, thinking of the nights I'd spent questioning my sanity, the years of subtle degradation, the threats against my family and career. The emotional toll of fighting Ethan was immense. There were days I could barely function from exhaustion and stress, nights when I questioned if the battle was worth it, moments when the simpler path of accepting a smaller settlement seemed temptingly easy. During one particularly low point, after learning Ethan had convinced a mutual friend to provide a declaration questioning my mental stability, I called Grace in tears. "I don't know if I can keep doing this," I confessed. "He has unlimited resources. He can drag this out forever." "That's what he's counting on," Grace said gently. "Men like Ethan don't expect women to have the stamina for a prolonged fight. They're used to wearing us down. The question is, are you willing to prove him wrong?" I thought about the Madison I used to be: confident, ambitious, unwilling to be diminished, and the version of myself I was slowly reclaiming through this battle. "Yes," I said, finding new resolve. "I am." 7 months into the divorce battle, I received an encrypted email from an unfamiliar address. The subject line read simply, Ethan Reynolds, information you should have. My first instinct was caution. This could easily be a trap set by Ethan's team. I forwarded it to Rebecca's cybersecurity specialist before opening it. "It's clean," he confirmed. "But proceed with care." The message was brief. "I worked at NeuroSync for 3 years. What Ethan is doing to you, he's done to others. There are more of us who want to talk. Meet at Arbor Cafe, Thursday, 2 p.m. Look for the woman with the blue notebook." Rebecca advised against going alone. If this is legitimate, it could be valuable. If it's a setup, it could be damaging. "I'm sending my associate with you." The Arbor Cafe was a small, busy establishment in Oakland, far from the Silicon Valley haunts where Ethan's network held sway. At precisely 2 p.m., I spotted her, a woman in her early 40s, with a blue Moleskine notebook open on the table before her. She was alone. Rebecca's associate scanned the cafe for potential threats, then nodded that it seemed safe to proceed. "Madison," the woman said as I approached, "thank you for coming. I'm Elise Donovan. I was senior product manager at NeuroSync until 2 years ago." Over the next hour, Elise shared her story, one disturbingly similar to mine. She had been pushed out after disagreeing with Ethan on ethical implementations of their technology. Her departure had been accompanied by threats, gaslighting, and attempts to damage her professional reputation. After I left, he made sure I couldn't get hired at any major tech company in the Valley. "I had to relocate to Seattle to rebuild my career," she explained. "When I saw news of your divorce filing, I recognized the playbook." Elise wasn't alone. She connected me with 7 former NeuroSync employees who had experienced similar treatment-talented individuals, who had challenged Ethan in some way and paid the price. Their stories followed a pattern: initial favor, then disagreement, followed by isolation, undermining, and eventually disposal. "We've been silenced by NDAs and fear," explained James Wilson, Ethan's former business partner who had been forced out in the early days of the company. Ethan's vindictive, and his memory for grudges is endless. But watching him do this to you, it's time someone stood up. Most shocking was when Catherine Sterling, Ethan's executive assistant, reached out through this growing network of allies. "I need you to know I was never having an affair with Ethan," she said when we met privately at my attorney's office. "That was a deliberate setup. He wanted you to believe we were involved. But I heard you discussing weekend plans, the suite at Meadowood, a business retreat that never happened," Catherine explained. "Ethan made those calls knowing you were home, loud enough for you to overhear. He'd been looking for a way to make you confront him so he could paint you as paranoid and jealous. Why would he do that? Because you were becoming too independent, too confident. He started noticing you, documenting things, questioning his decisions. He needed to reassert control." Catherine had been manipulated as well, kept in a constant state of insecurity about her position. "He told me terrible things about you, that you were unstable, that you resented me, that you wanted to fire me. I believed him because, well, he's Ethan Reynolds. Everyone believes him." What Catherine offered wasn't just moral support, but concrete evidence. As Ethan's assistant, she had access to records of his financial maneuvers, including documentation of assets hidden during our divorce proceedings. She also had emails and messages revealing his strategic attempts to undermine me professionally and personally. "This is potentially career-ending for me," she admitted, hands shaking as she handed over a flash drive. "But what he's doing to you, what he's done to others, it has to stop." With this growing coalition of witnesses and evidence, Rebecca expanded our legal strategy beyond the divorce itself. We began building a comprehensive case documenting Ethan's pattern of retaliation, financial misrepresentation, and abuse of power. "This isn't just about your settlement anymore," Rebecca explained. "This is about exposing a systemic issue." The media began picking up hints of trouble at NeuroSync. Business publications noted unusual executive departures and questioned the company's increasingly aggressive tactics with competitors. Tech blogs speculated about delays in promised product launches. Investment analysts raised concerns about governance issues. When quarterly results showed NeuroSync missing projections for the first time in its history, Ethan's board of directors started asking uncomfortable questions that went beyond our divorce and into his leadership capabilities. The board has formed a special committee to investigate allegations of misconduct. Thomas Harrington informed me discreetly. Several major investors are getting nervous about Ethan's judgment. Meanwhile, my own career was flourishing despite Ethan's attempts at sabotage. The firm I had joined, Meridian Creative, was smaller than Foster & Klein, but growing rapidly. Free from the constraints of being Mrs. Reynolds, I took creative risks that paid off impressively, bringing in 2 major accounts in my first quarter. "Your work speaks for itself," my new CEO said after I secured a campaign that won industry recognition. "And frankly, your resilience through this public battle has only enhanced your reputation among people who matter." The support network that formed around me extended beyond professional allies. I connected with other women who had left powerful, controlling partners, some from the tech world, others from finance, entertainment, politics. We met monthly, sharing strategies for rebuilding and healing. "The hardest part isn't the legal battle," shared Diana, who had divorced a prominent venture capitalist after 15 years. "It's remembering who you were before they started erasing you piece by piece." Those words resonated deeply. I had been gradually reclaiming parts of myself that had been suppressed during my marriage, my spontaneity, my candid opinions, my quirky sense of humor. Simple freedoms like changing my hair without considering Ethan's preferences, or spending a Sunday reading without feeling guilty about wasting time, felt revolutionary. 10 months into the divorce proceedings, with mounting pressure from both the legal case and the board investigation, Ethan's carefully constructed facade began to crack. During a particularly tense deposition, when confronted with evidence of financial concealment, he lost the composed demeanor he'd maintained throughout. "You think you've won? "You're nothing without me," he shouted, pointing at me across the conference table. "I made you. Everyone knows it." His attorneys quickly called for a recess, but the damage was done. The court reporter had captured every word of his outburst, a tangible demonstration of the controlling behavior I had documented for months. That evening, I received a call from Rebecca. "Ethan's team reached out," she said, her voice measured but with an undercurrent of satisfaction. "They want to discuss settlement terms. Apparently, his board has strongly suggested he resolve this matter quickly and quietly." The message was clear. Ethan Reynolds, the man who had told me I was nothing without him, was now being pressured to negotiate by the very power structure that had previously enabled him. "What do you want to do?" Rebecca asked. I thought about the journey of the past year, from controlled corporate wife to woman reclaiming her power. About the allies who had emerged to stand with me, despite risks to their own careers and reputations. About the Madison I was becoming in the aftermath of Ethan's attempts to destroy me. "Tell them we're ready to talk," I said. "But on our terms, not his." 13 months after the night Ethan told me to sleep in the guest room, our divorce was finalized. The settlement terms reflected not just the legal battle we had waged, but the fundamental shift in power dynamics between us. I received a substantial portion of our marital assets, significantly more than the prenup would have dictated, due to Ethan's documented violations of its terms. This included ownership of our Carmel property, ironically, the place where he had proposed, investment accounts that would ensure my financial independence, and a cash settlement that acknowledged the career damage I had sustained. More important than the financial terms was the absence of the comprehensive non-disclosure agreement Ethan had insisted upon throughout negotiations. While the settlement included standard confidentiality around the financial specifics, it explicitly allowed me to speak about my experience in the marriage and divorce. "This is unusual," Rebecca acknowledged as we reviewed the final documents. "High-profile tech divorces almost always include ironclad silencing provisions. The fact that he conceded on this point shows how much leverage we gained." The most satisfying element was a private letter of acknowledgement from Ethan, legally binding but never to be publicly disclosed, admitting to financial concealment, retaliatory actions, and emotionally abusive behavior. It wasn't a public apology. Ethan's ego would never permit that, but it was a permanent record of the truth. A document that prevented him from rewriting our history. "Will this prevent him from doing the same to someone else?" I asked Rebecca as we concluded our final meeting. "That's not something we can control," she replied honestly. "But the coalition you helped build, the witnesses who came forward, the board's increased scrutiny of his behavior, those create accountability structures that didn't exist before. And that matters." In the days following the settlement, I faced the daunting task of rebuilding a life that was truly my own, not as Madison Carter, ambitious young marketing executive, nor as Madison Reynolds, billionaire's wife, but as someone new, a woman shaped by both experiences but defined by neither. The financial security provided by the settlement was significant, but its meaning to me transcended monetary value. It represented compensation for years of diminishment, for professional opportunities lost, for the emotional labor of managing a relationship with someone who viewed me as an accessory rather than a partner. I channeled a portion of those resources into founding the Clarity Foundation, a nonprofit providing legal, financial, and psychological support to individuals leaving controlling relationships. The name honored the moment of clarity I'd experienced that night in the guest room, when I finally saw my marriage for what it truly was. Most people in these situations don't have access to attorneys like Rebecca or the resources to fight a protracted battle, I explained at our launch event. Clarity aims to level that playing field. Grace joined the foundation's board, along with several other women from our support network. Catherine Sterling, who had risked her career to provide evidence against Ethan, became our first program director after NeuroSync terminated her employment following the settlement. Professionally, I continued at Meridian Creative, declining offers to return to larger firms that had previously aligned with Ethan. The freedom to make decisions based solely on my own preferences, without calculating their impact on someone else's ego or image, felt like a luxury after years of careful self-editing. The hardest part of the aftermath was processing what had happened to me emotionally. With the legal battle concluded, the adrenaline that had carried me through faded, leaving raw grief in its wake. I mourned not just the end of my marriage, but the years spent diminishing myself to accommodate Ethan's need for control. Therapy became essential to this healing process. My therapist, Dr. Torres, specialized in recovery from controlling relationships. What you experienced follows a classic pattern, she explained during one session. High control partners don't start with obvious abuse. They begin with charm and intensity, creating a foundation of attachment before gradually introducing controlling behaviors. But why didn't I see it? I asked, still struggling with shame about how long I had rationalized Ethan's treatment. I'm an intelligent, educated woman. I should have recognized what was happening. The most insidious aspect of this type of relationship is how it normalizes abnormal behaviors incrementally. It's like the analogy of boiling a frog. If the temperature rises gradually enough, the frog doesn't perceive the danger until it's too late. Those sessions helped me identify the red flags I had missed or dismissed. Ethan's love bombing in the early days, his subtle undermining of my confidence, the isolation from friends who asked uncomfortable questions, the incremental increases in controlling behaviors. The question isn't why you didn't leave sooner, Dr. Torres emphasized. It's how you found the strength to leave at all. Many never do. That strength had come from reconnecting with my authentic self, the Madison who existed before and beneath Ethan's influence. I rediscovered old passions, hiking the Northern California trails I'd abandoned when Ethan deemed them not worth the time, taking photography classes I'd put aside when he commented that my pictures were amateur, reconnecting with college friends whose casual style and modest incomes had made them unwelcome in our social circle. Freedom manifested in unexpected ways. I cut my hair short after years of maintaining the long style Ethan preferred. I bought a small but charming house in Berkeley with a garden and a sunroom for reading utterly lacking in the showcase quality Ethan insisted upon in our properties. I adopted a rescue dog, a scruffy terrier mix named Charlie, who would have horrified Ethan's sensibilities about appropriate pets for someone of our position. 1 year after the finalization of my divorce, I hosted a dinner party at my new home, a gathering of the people who had supported me through the darkest period of my life. My parents, Jessica, Grace and Thomas, former colleagues who had stood by me, new friends from my therapy group. As we sat in my eclectic dining room, eating from mismatched vintage plates I'd collected, a decorating choice Ethan would have vetoed, the contrast with the carefully orchestrated social events of my married life was stark and joyful. To Madison, Grace toasted, raising her glass, who reminded all of us that the cage, no matter how gilded, is never worth the freedom beyond it. Later that evening, as the party wound down, Thomas pulled me aside with news about Ethan. The board limited his authority. He's still CEO, but with significant oversight. Your case was a wake-up call that couldn't be ignored. I felt a complex mix of emotions, vindication, certainly, but also a strange sense of closure. Ethan's power over my life, my thoughts, my choices, was finally completely ended. Dating again came slowly and cautiously. I had coffee with a literature professor. Jessica introduced me to dinner with a pediatric surgeon I met through volunteer work. There was no rush, no need to define these connections or shape myself to match someone else's expectations. For the first time in years, I was moving through the world as entirely myself. The most profound realization came gradually. The divorce had not been the end of something, but the beginning. Not a failure, but an act of self-preservation and, ultimately, self-love. What Ethan had intended as punishment, telling me to sleep in the guest room, attempting to put me in my place, had instead catalyzed my liberation. I often think about the night that changed everything. How a command meant to demean me became the moment I reclaimed my dignity. How serving those divorce papers wasn't just ending a marriage, but declaring independence from a life built on false premises and conditional acceptance. If my story offers any wisdom, it's this. Your worth is inherent, not conferred by another person's validation or wealth or status. The most expensive cage is still a cage, and sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away not in defeat, but in recognition of your own value. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice that ultimately led to your freedom? Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe to join our community of people reclaiming their authentic selves. And remember, you are never truly trapped as long as you can envision a different future for yourself. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I wish you the courage to honor your own worth in every relationship you choose.